I was going to talk about glasses, and then I thought, let me ask everybody who has glasses on stand up, and I thought that is a stupid question. I can see that, of course, unless I would not have my own glasses on. Then I thought, wow, there are people with contact lenses, and you don't see that. But again, let's not go that exercise. Why do we wear glasses or contact lenses? Just to improve vision, of course. That's the reason why we have it. And very often, if you get used to it, I think if you forget them, you're in trouble. At least that happens to me. Now, you could ask the question, do we also wear glasses figuratively speaking? What do I mean? Now, if you're an IT developer, you cannot look at a process or an administration task without thinking, oh, we can do this differently. We can do this much faster, much more efficient. If you are a psychologist, you cannot look at a person without thinking what's going on in his or her mind. Now, does that also apply to our faith, to the Bible? Can it be that we wear glasses when we read the Bible? Now, you could say, yes, culturally, you have come from different cultures, so you might read the Bible slightly different. It might be that you have another upbringing that gives you a slight different take on things. Maybe you have made life experiences, and that shapes what you understand from the Bible. Now today we're going to see at some glasses that I think we all need, or at least it will help us to understand and see who God really is. For me at least, it was a revealing way. Now, for those who were here during Acts, we have been going through the book of Acts. And in chapter 11, we talked, for instance, about how the promises that were given to Abraham in the Old Testament, so ages ago, came to be fulfilled ages later when Paul and Peter started proclaiming the gospel to be preached to all the nations. So not only Israel, all the nations. So you could say that the promise is basically like glasses. You look at a promise, you look to the New Testament and you say, wow, it has already been promised so long ago. And it helps the credibility of Christianity and the Christian faith, I think. Now, does it also work the other way around? Can it be that we need to read the Old Testament through glasses of the New Testament? Could it be that when we read part of the Old Testament, where we sometimes struggle with, we say, oh, this is a God, wow, this is also God. When we read it in the perspective of the New Testament, the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we suddenly start to see and understand that passage in the Old Testament. That brings me to the question that was raised on the last, it was not the last Sunday of the year, but the Sunday of the 21st of December, when we looked at Psalm 136, and everybody was involved to raise questions. And one of the questions that came up was, how is it relevant to us that Israel was freed from slavery and being liberated from their enemies? Psalm 136. Now, we will read it now through, only a passage, 10 to 25. And you might remember there is always the refrain of His love endures forever. Now we have looked at that quite extensively, so I leave that out for now. I only focus on the storyline, okay? So let's read Psalm 136, verse 10 to 25. And then it says, to him who struck down the firstborn of Egypt, when him is then God, and brought Israel out from among them, with a mighty hand and outstretched arm, to him who divided the Red Sea asunder and brought Israel through the midst of it, but swept Pharaoh and his army into the Red Sea, to him who led his people through the wilderness, to him who struck down great kings and killed mighty kings, Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, and gave their land as an inheritance to his servant Israel. He remembered us in our low estate and freed us from our enemies. He gives food to every creature, gives thanks to the God of heaven. Now, today we want to look at a common theme in the Bible, I would say, the red thread in the Bible called deliverance. You could see it in this passage, I guess, how Israel was delivered. Now, how is that relevant to us? And we have basically kind of 2 points. Let's read and apply the Old Testament through New Testament glasses. And the first point is simply how to read, and the second, how to apply. So it's very basic. Stay with me, it can be, well, I don't know, we'll see how it goes. So we read and apply the Old Testament through the New Testament, through New Testament glasses. Read. How does the New Testament help us understand the Old Testament better? Now, with Psalm 36 in mind, how does the New Testament refer to Israel saved from slavery? There are many places in the New Testament that points to this story. More specifically to the Exodus, to the Israelites leaving Egypt. The Exodus is the red thread, a storyline through the whole Bible. How? Well, we go by some New Testament texts briefly. It's not the purpose to memorize them. It's just touching upon so that you see how that is intertwined. Where is Egypt mentioned the first time in the New Testament? I think you might know. It's in Matthew 2, very at the beginning. What happened? Who went to Egypt? Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. Right? And it says in verse 15, chapter 2 from Matthew, out of Egypt I have called my son. So there is a link between Egypt, Exodus, and Jesus' work. Apostle John, John 8 says, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. If the Son sets you free, and the Son is Jesus, you will be free indeed. So, if we think about being a slave, or being set free as a slave, what do we think of? We think back of the Israelites who were set free from Egypt, who were slaves there. And also in Romans 6, slavery is portrayed as a symbol of bondage, being bound, right, to sin. Now, Luke 9, what happened in Luke 9? I'm not sure, I thought it was mentioned last week, but I'm not sure, I didn't check it. The Mount of Transfiguration. Who were there on the Mount of Transfiguration? Jesus, of course, Elijah, and Moses. And they were discussing among themselves, and they talked about Jesus' departure. Now, we should not think about the airport or something. Departure is generally understood as his death. So, and in Greek, what is the word in Greek for departure? Exodus. So as Israel was saved from the Egyptians, Jesus comes and sets free people from slavery. You see. Other example, in Corinthians, Paul says, 1 Corinthians 5, Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Now, where has the sacrificing and the lamb, where has that been introduced to mankind? In Egypt, when the people of Israel were preparing for their departure. Last one, Hebrews 11. There are a lot of people listed in Hebrews 11, mostly Old Testament figures, for that they believed in God, they trusted Him. Whole list. And in verse 29 it says then, that the people of Israel were passing through the Red Sea, which is the Red Sea, the Old Testament, Israel passing the Red Sea when they left Egypt. And it is added, they left the Red Sea by faith. By faith. Well, we'll come back to that. Also, that is a reference to an Old Testament story recorded in the Old Testament. So the New Testament, when we know the New Testament, we start to understand better the Old Testament. Now, what is actually happening here? All kind of references from the New Testament, or in the New Testament, are made to the Old Testament. Very often, the deliverance of the people of Israel is made as a kind of foretelling of what will go on later when Jesus comes. So if we read back too, we can also read back the Bible, Old Testament, by looking for Jesus. Now some will say that is Christocentrically preaching. It's a difficult word, but it's basically you look for Jesus in the whole Scripture. And we will see that the passage we have at hand, even if his name doesn't appear in the Old Testament, not so often, or basically not really, you see very often that Jesus Christ appears in the Old Testament. So, what to keep in mind maybe? You might know the expression, many ways lead to Rome. So, big city, Rome, and you can get there all kinds of ways, right? That is a bit how it is here. If you take the different roads to Jesus Christ from the Old Testament, there are different roads. They all lead to Jesus. Somehow, some way. Now you say, okay, wait. There are so many stories in the Bible, Old Testament, whole list of names, of numbers. I don't see how Jesus is in there. Well, I encourage you, make it a habit to think, how does Jesus show up here? Because the thing is, once you start to see it in faith, of course, if we believe the New Testament, we will see it. If you don't believe at all in Jesus Christ, then probably you won't see anything. You will start to see in such a way that he shows up that we cannot deny it. We cannot, so to speak, unsee it. We cannot not see him. Now, okay, wonderful. You say maybe so far, okay, nice story, but it's a bit high level, abstract. Can we get a bit down to earth? Let's do that. The second point is not only read the Old Testament through New Testament glasses, also apply the Old Testament through New Testament glasses. Let's look specifically at the deliverance of Israel. How does that apply to us? Now, for those who are familiar with the concept of Christocentric preaching, we say, oh, yeah, I know. You are saved from, Israel was saved from Egypt, so we are saved from sin. Ready? And it's true, but there's more to say. I think there's more to learn from those Old Testament stories and history. Let's look at two. There's many more, but let's look at two. One is crossing the Red Sea. Crossing from death to life. That's actually what it is. It's deliverance, definitely, forever. And the second point is freed from bondage. As I said, bondage being bound, right? Being a slave. So the Israelites were basically on the way to the promised land, and they had to find their way to be free. They have been slaves for 400 years, so they have to find their way to be free. That's quite a challenge. And they experienced that slavery or bondage has layers. It has different layers. We'll see what that means. So crossing the Red Sea is one. Freed from bondage, which has layers, is the second. Now, do we know the story from Israel being released from Egypt by the Pharaoh, sent through the the Red Sea, and then they come into the Red Sea, and then the waters basically stand as walls, and they walk through in a marvelous way. And when the last person of Israel left with dry feet, the walls came down again. And Pharaoh and his soldiers died. Now, it's interesting, at the end of Exodus 14, where that is described, it says that they have seen their deliverance, the Israelites, miraculous deliverance, and they started, it says literally, they started to trust God and Moses. So they have seen it and they started to trust. They got to realize they got out of ownership from Pharaoh and got into new ownership by God. They left Egypt for good. So in other words, the crossing of the Red Sea is a crossing from death to life. That's how we can see it. How? Not because they were just better than the Egyptians. There's no point. Not that they were kind of, let's say, deserving it, because of God's grace. He has chosen them to set them free from slavery. Now, how does it apply to us? I think the Bible tells us very many places that we are slaves. It doesn't sound very popular these days, but that is what it says. We are enslaved to material things. We are bound up in ourselves. It's I, me, and myself. We are mastered by all kinds of limitations. For instance, we say, I can only take it if science proves it. And I'm not against science, absolutely not. But some things cannot be answered by science. And I remember that Olaf said last week, people might admit that they are not perfect, but they still say they are good. Being sinners is another story. People are all messed up. Yes, as soon as we basically let God not sit on the throne, but we sit ourselves on the throne. We are our own boss. Or we change God for idols, for things that we make so important that we worship them. Yeah? Matthias said, worship God is really all what this is about. Now, can we get rid of this position? Can we get out of this default position of being a sinner? Yes, we know we can change ownership. At the moment that we put our faith in Jesus. At the moment that we trust Him. And once we believe Him, we cross too from death to life. At that moment, instantly, completely, permanently. And we are freed from the ultimate consequences of sin too, from wrath, from punishment, all those things, the penalty, by faith, by grace, forever. Now, what does that mean for us? You might know the movie Schindler's List. It was produced in 1993, and Oskar Schindler, who was a historical person, by the way, he was basically a very successful businessman, and his factories made all kind of kitchen equipment, as well as ammunition. And he had a very good relationship with high-ranking officers in the army at that time. Till he found out that Jews were killed because they were Jews. And what did he start to do? If you've seen the movie, you will remember. He started to buy those people, one by one, as employees. There was a pretense, of course, because they were not necessarily better employees. But by doing so, he could save their lives from death camp. And at the end of the movie, you see a very touching passage. At the end, he almost collapses. Why? Because he says, I could have saved so many more people. So he is almost, let's say, falling apart, tormented by guilt. Do we have similar figures in the Bible? Well, think about Paul. He killed a lot of Christians when he was not converted. Think about Peter, one prominent guy, right? Just before Jesus died, he lied 3 times about him. Even if he said just, a couple of hours before, oh Lord, I will never let you, let's say, suffer, I will stand for you. And those guys found a way to continue living. They found a way to deal with their guilt. How? Because they experienced real forgiveness, deep forgiveness of their sins, of their weaknesses, of their mistakes. They passed from death to life. Now, there is a way of explaining this, and I just want to pass it on to you. It's Tim Keller, who's a late pastor in New York, who brings this home in I think, a good way. Try to picture the Israelites walking through the Red Sea. They all walk. Now, it's not from the Bible, right? This is not told in the Bible. I'm just kind of trying to make that story. A lot of people, thousands of people. And probably there have been people who walked through and said, wow, God, this is great. Very victorious. They said, we can beat them. Kind of in their mind an upset of, we're going to win here. But you could also have people who are walking, how long will it go well? They might come down, scared. Or you might have people who are very kind of pessimistic and doubting, say, well, we might get through, but what is at the other end? I don't know. All different people walking through that path, through the Red Sea. So what does he point out? They all crossed the sea. They all crossed from death to life, irrespective how they believed, irrespective the quality of their belief. Some very, very confident, right? Others were maybe shaky. Because it's not about the quality of our faith. It's all about whom we believe in, the object of our faith. And I think that's a very true statement. It's not the quality of how I believe. It's whom we believe. Do we put our trust in Jesus? And that applies to us in the same way. We are very different people, coming from different angles. I think it's not a matter of having different quality of faith. One is a good believer, a better believer, something a bit worse. No. Whom do we believe? Do we put our trust in Jesus as the ultimate Savior? The second application is basically the other one. How does that make us think? If we passed from death to life, how does it make us look at things here and now? If I'm worried now, maybe, about something. I'm in troubles. I have a big thing that I need to find my way with. I think if we have a perspective on eternity and we have life in eternity and we believe that those things get relatively seen smaller. They get really less worrisome than they might be without that perspective, without that vision on eternity. Now you say, okay, all right. Difficult. Those Israelites went through from death to life, and they went on to the desert, and all good with those guys? Everybody who knows the Bible knows that was not the case. They went through the desert, there was a lot of hassle, a lot of complaining also to God, to Moses. So it was not really a done deal in that sense. Yet it was a done deal that they were set free, and so we are set free in Jesus, permanently, but slavery has layers. That's the second point. What does that mean? They kept doubting Moses. Now what's the parallel with us here? We might, I hope we have, experienced and know what it means to be saved in Jesus. Doesn't mean that we don't have to deal with sin or with the struggles of life. Yes. So we could say there are three layers, kind of. The first layer is what we would call objective, freed objectively, which means basically you change ownership. Legally we are God's. As soon as you believe in Jesus, we are God's. We are his possession. And there is nothing that can change that. All right? What does it mean then to be subjectively freed? I think that is something that Paul describes in the letter to the Galatians. He says, when you come to believe, the Spirit starts working in you more and more, and you start to discover what's wrong in your life, or where you do things that are basically not in line with what the Lord asks. And you only discover that on your way, not from day one. So we might still have struggles in terms of sin, or let's say difficulties in life. And the third layer is another one that's also talked in Romans 6 and 7 as well, by the way. We are bound by a sinful nature. What does that mean, a sinful nature? Well, if you have been here with us at the beginning of last year, that's maybe not too many, we have talked about idols. We talked about the gospel, how the gospel changes our perception, our worship of idols. If something is bigger than God, it's an idol, right? We are mastered by it. How do we overcome that? And I read a very good, nice story, which I want to share briefly, because it explains really how this works in practice. Imagine you were a slave before the abolition of slavery. So some year back, let's say in the States for now, you were a slave. And then slavery is abolished, and from now on, you are a free man. So by law, you are free. You moved from death to life, so to speak. You're free. But imagine you walk on the street, and you're yelled at by, in this case, a white man, previous slave owner, let's say. He yells at you. What will probably happen with that guy? Not unlikely, he will get scared. His reflex is like, oh, what's going on? He could say, I'm legally free. I don't care. Very often, I think, that is how we deal with weaknesses, with sins. We are set free objectively, but subjectively, we are still kind of under it. We are not completely out of it. So, and then the third one is basically, if you're a slave, you have been a slave, you might not overcome a trauma that the guy who was just walking there, the trauma might stay with you for the rest of your life. You might only be freed, well, after you die, kind of. In other words, our sinful nature sometimes is never going to go away. You might still suffer it through your whole life. In other words, and we have New Testament terms for that, if we are objectively free, we are owned by God now. Right? We are saved, passed from death to life. We are subjectively free, which means maybe that we have to grow. We call that, in New Testament terms, sanctification. We start to look more like Him, gradually, and not always line up, sometimes like this. But we will ultimately be fully free at glorification, when Jesus comes back to the earth. We will be fully free. Now, why is this all important? What do we do with this, actually? I think there's a key difference of the Christian faith and any other faith or religion or even a secular faith. Because generally we tend to say, just live a better life, live good enough, and you will go to heaven. Most faith systems are like building a bridge. And you have all kinds of, let's say, pillars. And you build the bridge gradually, from one pillar to the other pillar. And you hope that you will, at the end, reach the other side. Is that how the Christian faith is? No. If we come to believe in Jesus, we are saved for eternity. It's not an endeavor faces, and hopefully we get there. If we believe now, we are safe in him. Now, do you have that assurance? Do you believe that? And it doesn't change suddenly all the rest of your life, suddenly that all sins are gone, all weakness, all challenges. No, not at all. They are still there, very often. And maybe sometimes even more. But there's a huge difference between most of the religions and Christian faith, where you're saved at the moment that you believe, because Jesus has died. Jesus has paid. The good news is, as we've said many times, good news of what has happened. It's not a kind of prediction. It has happened historically. Now, that makes us grateful, I think. And probably that's also what helps us to deal with our weaknesses, our sins. Because it's not a matter of kind of, oh, I will not sin, I will. No, we can be grateful. If it happens, if we do something wrong, and it happens, we don't need to beat ourselves up. There's no point. We know there's already paid for it. And out of that gratefulness, we have a good motivation and an incentive to do more and live more as the Lord asks. If we say, well, I'm saved, it doesn't matter what I do, then you have just not understood the gospel. It shows that we have not really grasped what this is, because there's only one fitting response to God's grace. He did everything. There's one fitting response, it's gratefulness. Accepting with a grateful heart what he has done. So I'm aware that I went a bit broader than normal. And I hope you could follow. Let's read and apply the Old Testament through glasses of the New Testament. It will give us a really deeper vision on who God is, how he saved us. We will close with a hymn that we will sing after this, and there is one verse 3, which when I read it, is kind of complicated. It's a bit Old English. So I want to give you immediately the regular English, so it's easier to understand. But it's deep in meaning, so I don't want to take it out either. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be, which means basically God has shown me so much undeserved grace that's really what I depend on. Let thy goodness, like a fetter, which is like a chain, bind my wandering heart to thee. So please, Lord, bind my wandering heart close to you. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. So I know I love you, Lord, but sometimes I'm kind of walking away from you somehow. I drift away. Here's my heart, Lord. Take and seal it. Seal it for thy courts above. So, God, I give you my heart. Please secure it to be yours until I am with you in heaven. Let's pray. Lord, we